Hi, I'm Andrew Nelson. I'm one of the researchers on the report we're launching this evening. I'm really glad you could join us, and whether you're here in person or watching online, we want you to participate in the discussion. To facilitate that, we'll be using Slido.com, a simple, interactive platform for live Q&A and polling during events. So here's what you'll need to do. First, open a browser on your device. Then, type in Slido.com. Then, enter event code CAPRI. And that's it, you're live. From here, you'll be able to send in your questions, upvote the questions of others, and participate in live polls. We recommend stating your name and location, but that's not a requirement. And that's it. You're all set to engage with us throughout this event. Now I'll hand over to Charisse, who will be bringing us welcome remarks this evening.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us this evening. I'm Sherry Simpson, Communications Specialist at the Caribbean Policy Research Institute, otherwise known as CAPRI. CAPRI is an independent think tank committed to evidence-based research that drives better public policy making in Jamaica and across the Caribbean. This evening, we'll be continuing that mission with CAPRI's Budget Breakdown 2025. Where we don't just look at the numbers, we take a deeper look at the physical priorities and decisions that will shape Jamaica's future. A warm welcome to the Minister of Finance and the Public Service, members of our Board of Directors, the private sector, academia, civil society, and all engaged Jamaicans and committed friends of Jamaica that are here with us in person at the University Regional Headquarters or joining us online on YouTube. This is your budget, and your engagement is what makes this conversation this evening meaningful. Usually, I'm working behind the scenes handling communications and media tasks, but tonight I have the honor of standing here before you to help this event get started. But I'm not the only one stepping into a new role. For the first time, Jamaica's national budget is being overseen by a female Minister of Finance and the Public Service, the Honorable, yes, the Honorable Fayval Williams, a steadfast supporter of CAPRI's work in her own advocacy for data-driven policy making. She steps into this role following Dr. Nigel Clarke's transition to the International Monetary Fund. But regardless of who is in the hot seat, there is one constant that you can depend on: CAPRI's annual budget breakdown report and launch event. The national budget is one of the most critical policy documents in the country. It's where government priorities are set in stone. But between the complex figures, inflation adjustments, and shifting allocations, it can feel inaccessible to many of us. That's why CAPRI's budget breakdown exists. So what can you expect tonight? Well, we'll start with a short video highlighting the perspectives of everyday Jamaicans who don't normally have a seat at the policy table, but whose voices are essential for making public policy inclusive and representative. Then you'll hear from CAPRI's Executive Director, Dr. Damien King, who will present key insights from this year's Budget Breakdown Report. Following that, we'll have a one-on-one conversation between Dr. King and Minister Fayval Williams unpacking the implications of this year's national budget. And of course, As you heard in the video, we want you all here in person or online to be a part of the conversation. Submit your questions online using Slido. Just visit slido.com and enter the event code CAPRI. If you've missed that, don't worry. We'll remind you again constantly throughout the evening. This isn't just about the numbers. It's about how the government's decisions will impact your life, your businesses, and your future. With that, let's get started. Please turn your attention to the screen for our opening video. Thank you. The national budget isn't just numbers on a page. It affects the cost of living, the quality of services, and the opportunities available to every Jamaican. But how much do people really know about it? We took to the streets to hear firsthand how the budget impacts daily life, whether citizens feel they have a voice in the process, and what they believe should change. From markets to campuses, supermarkets to the city streets, this is what they had to say.
I didn't watch the budget, and I don't think I know that much other than like the big ticket items.
Well, I remember a few things. I definitely like the SLB proposal, and also seeing that I want to get a job as soon as I graduate. I like the income tax threshold.
I noticed that they were focusing a lot on the stock market in terms of trying to bolster it and, further bolstering the junior stock market. So I liked that because I believe it's very important to invest in Jamaica.
I think the most prescient issues for me as a student would probably be education funding, specifically regarding the university, and also spending on general life issues like transport.
But as a taxman, we used to work with tax office and I sat there. We really appreciate that. I like that. The ticket them accumulate, we'd love to pay them.
Would love to see more money going into the education system.
Just got the healthcare and the security force thing.
I'm a lawyer by profession, so I would definitely want to see more resources allocated to strengthening our judicial infrastructure.
I actually love that I can actually see the money being used for the roads, because that was a big struggle. You can't afford to always change your tire.
A lot of communities have young members there who are not working, and these are persons who are going to find themselves in crime. So provide more computers in different communities and things that they can really do in their community, or more places that offer trade.
I would certainly be interested in participating in a consultation process.
Yes, of course.
We the elders, the citizens of Jamaica should have a say in the budget.
But then the people them should have more say, and not just the politicians them alone.
Of course, majority of people should have a say in what affects them daily. They should have a say, so you place more emphasis upon the people's business.
Absolutely. I think we need to have a greater say. I think they need to do more groundwork, maybe do surveys, just to be on the ground more, because it directly affects us.
Good evening. There are approximately 700,000 persons that Tax Administration Jamaica has a record of, that they are tax compliant in some way. Only 30% of those are above the income tax threshold, that is now at 1.7 million and moving to 1.8 million in the current fiscal year. But according to Statin's labor force survey, the total employed labor force is 1.4 million. So that means there's another 700,000 and change who are employed, who are earning, and have no tax footprint. That's half of the employed labor force. So if we stack all this together, then that 30% who are above the threshold now becomes 15% of the entire employed labor force who is paying any income taxes. And as you would imagine, of those for whom their income is being taxed, many of those have undeclared income. that may be earning, that they may be earning outside of PAYE. So the share of taxable income sources rather than persons paying income tax is certainly less than 15%. We don't know how much less. But whatever that percentage is, you know, maybe it's 10, maybe it's 12%, of all the income being earned by persons working, something less than 15% of those income sources are supporting the income tax revenue. How that brings in $100 billion a year, I guess the minister will be able to help us understand that. But it's almost like we don't have much of an income tax. This is going to be relevant later on. Our analysis of the budget is divided into three parts. We look at the credibility and sustainability. Then we find what are the key shifts and trends taking place. And then we look at new policies and programs. Starting off with credibility and sustainability. Many elements to that. But the first one, and the most important one, is to look at whether the budget implies obligations on taxpayers in the future. Is the public debt. And one knows Jamaica's public debt is, the trajectory of Jamaica's public debt is the second greatest story ever told, coming down from almost 150% of GDP in 2012, now programmed at the end of the next fiscal year to reach 64%. As a result of that, the interest share of revenue at one point representing almost half of every revenue dollar, the interest share of revenue is now down to 16%. So that tells you that the budget that has been promulgated is sustainable. Its implications for the future means similar budgets on similar assumptions and similar expectations could go on indefinitely without getting the country into trouble. The more interesting part of what comes over the budget is the shifts and trends. If we look at revenue, and as always, the analysis that we perform compensates for inflation. Now, inflation normally reduces the purchase nominal amount when you compare between years. But what we do is we adjust the nominal figures for past years to the level that it would be to purchase the same amount of goods and services. So what we are showing here on all of our charts is real values, real revenue, adjusted for inflation. And when you do it that way, you realize that even though the budgeted revenue is a higher nominal amount than last year, the increase is less than the expected inflation. So the amount of revenue that is expected can purchase less goods and services. So it's a real contraction in revenue. This is the first time this is happening since the pandemic. Since the pandemic forced a contraction in revenue. This, of course, is going to have implications for what the government can afford to buy. A second key discovery is when you look at the sources of the government's revenue. Now, there are four categories of earnings. Income taxes, taxes on personal income and taxes on corporate income. That's called direct taxes. You're getting taxes directly from the people who earn it. And then value-added taxes, GCT, taxes on production and consumption, and trade taxes, taxes on imports, are indirect taxes. You're taxing the persons via their activity rather than directly. And then you have other sources of revenue, you know, grants, fees, and so on. And if we look at the shares of each of these categories over the last 5 years, the thing that stands out and is striking is the rising share of revenue that is coming from income taxes. From 24% of revenue 5 years ago to 31% of revenue as estimated in the new budget. This is concerning because it makes a difference in your economy where the taxes are coming from. We're going to need to talk about this. One of the reasons that, one of the factors that explains that is what has happened to the income tax threshold over the last several years. Now again, we have taken the income tax threshold, which started out in 2016 at $600,000 a year, was increased over 2 years to 1.5 million, stayed at that level up until last fiscal year when it was increased to 1.7 million and programmed to increase to 1.8 million this year. But when we do that inflation adjustment thing, when we translate it into purchasing power, then you get a different trajectory. Here's the increase from 2016 to 2018. It was implemented over 2 years. And then the 1.5 million eroded by inflation. The purchasing power gets eroded by inflation. Then there was an increase last year, and then the programmed increase from 1.7 to 1.8 this year causes it to keep up with inflation. And in the minister's presentation, she said that she promised that there's going to be $100,000 increases in each of the next 2 fiscal years, which by our expectation is just about the rate of inflation. So that keeps it constant in purchasing power terms. What to do with the income tax threshold is an important question. It's one of the questions that not only the government faces, but we as taxpayers and as an entire society want to think about. Let's talk about the implications. And let's go back to our employed labor force. So let's say that this is in order. So lower incomes are at the bottom, higher incomes are at the top. If you look at just those who are within the tax net, within the income tax net, then we see that the tax structure is equitable. Because the more income you earn, the greater the share of your income that is above the threshold, and therefore the higher average rate of income tax you are paying. And so we say that if you look at only those who are compliant, then the income tax structure represents equity. But we call this vertical equity. When we now take account of those who are the half of the labor force, for which there is no income tax footprint, then we see a great inequity, because all of these people are paying income taxes, and all of these people are paying approximately zero. We call this a horizontal inequity, because the lines go horizontally. So what happens when you raise the income tax threshold? Well, let's raise it. So as you can see, it's only the top, currently 30%, who are going to benefit from that. You give up a lot of revenue, and all the benefit goes to the top 30%, to the ones who are relatively well off in the society. That doesn't look like a sensible thing to do. As the former Minister of Finance pointed out on this platform last year. But raising the threshold reduces the horizontal inequity, because now you have more people who are in the zero band. And the horizontal inequity is not a minor consideration, because it represents half the labor force. So that's kind of the difficulty in facing that decision. Let's look briefly at the expenditure side of the budget. Of course, since there is less real revenue, comes as no surprise that the purchasing power of the allocation to security is programmed to be less, for social services programmed to be less, and for the economy is programmed to be less. So, smaller government. Everything is going down in real terms. Policies and programs. There were a handful of announcements when you look at all of the budget presentations. We want to pull out 3 that are of particular importance. The Solidarity Program was announced, which is small cash handouts between 20,000 and 50,000 Jamaican dollars to individuals who will either select themselves and go onto an online platform and apply for it, or who might be brought to the platform by their member of parliament. When you have any kind of welfare program, you want to look at how well it is targeted. Does it reach only the beneficiaries and people who you don't want to benefit because it is intended for people within a certain quintile, at a low quintile, don't get into the program? And you want it to be inclusive and reach as many of those people as possible. Well, it's unlikely that anybody who's very well off is going to waste time applying for $20,000 in an online portal. So it does satisfy exclusivity. But it is not going to reach all of the persons who are at the income level that this is designed for. So there's going to be an element of arbitrariness in it. Something like the new social housing program. So, we give it an amber score on targeting. On equity, well, it's a transfer from general taxation to the poorest. So it certainly satisfies the equity criteria. And as far as the capacity of the government to deliver it in the way intended, they are using the online platform that was designed for cash transfers during COVID. That's already in place. It's been tested at a much greater scale. So it's not going to impose much additional cost on government. So kudos for that. The other set of policies that we want to look at is a series of reforms to NHT lending, including increasing the loan limit, reducing the down payment, reducing the interest rate to the lowest income borrowers, because the interest rates on NHT loans are not going to be tiered. And when you look at those reforms, those who are the poorest in the society are the ones least likely to overcome the eligibility requirements to apply for an NHT loan in the first place. And again, NHT is funded out of the labor force. So this is not going to be meeting the neediest people, who are not the ones who are going to be applying. In any case, when you look at the equity consideration, as CAPRI has pointed out in many reports, the existence of NHT is a transfer from force to those who can afford to buy a house. So increasing the amount of the subsidy and raising the value of the house that can be bought actually worsens the equity consideration. There certainly is capacity within the National Housing Trust to be able to implement these reforms. They have their existing management in place, so that doesn't present a constraint. Okay, and the third one is the promised revision to the Income Tax Relief Act, which was promulgated in 2014, I believe, for incentivizing through tax relief large-scale investment. And there has not been a lot of take-up based on this act. And so the minister promised to revise the act to increase the take-up. This is a concern because whenever a government grants a tax relief, an income tax relief, to any category of investment, large-scale businesses, small-scale businesses, agriculture, then, as every Minister of Finance knows, and as logic will tell you, over time, the budget must balance. So it requires a higher average level of taxation from all sources to be able to compensate for the companies at whatever scale and whatever industries are being allowed tax breaks. So it does raise the question, why are you raising the cost of doing business for everybody else in order to subsidize particular activities? In any case, there's a principle here. And the principle is, if a business depends on not paying taxes to be commercially viable, then that business and that industry is unsustainable. Why are we encouraging unsustainable businesses? Okay, takeaways. So this is the most important thing. Debt continues to come down. Secondly, a fall in revenue for the first time in real terms. Thirdly, the concern about the rising share of income, rising share of revenue that is coming from income taxes versus indirect taxes. Fourthly, the income tax threshold that has been on this dance, where should it dance to after this? And the fifth takeaway has not been mentioned at all. This is an election year. I watched the presentations waiting for the big headline grabbing, economic damaging policy announcement that is designed to grab cheap votes. I didn't hear it. So the absence of such in the policies and programs is a takeaway. Apparently, nobody's running with it. The recommendations that follow from this are the following. A question has been raised, and not just by the opposition, by other commentators. You know, there's an idea in economics that debt of 60% of GDP is kind of a benchmark where a country doesn't really have to worry about it anymore. That is to say, the fiscal program is not seen as risky when your debt is down to 60% of GDP. So should the government continue to focus on debt reduction, or should it focus now on using some of the revenue dividend in other ways that may have positive effects? And we accept debt going forward that is not contracting as impressively. CAPRI's recommendation is that the government continue to focus on debt reduction. It is inherently a country in a vulnerable position, not only in terms of climate activities, but in terms of just being a small, open economy in a volatile world. Indeed, a world that has become more volatile recently. So it needs to have a big cushion of protection. And when you owe 60% of your GDP in debt, you are less able to be resilient in such a world. We think the focus on debt reduction should continue. It is a concern that so much of the income tax revenue is coming from, so much of the tax revenue is coming from income taxes. Measures should be taken to reverse that. largely because that income tax burden, as we saw, is falling on only a tiny share of the employed labor force. And we recommend that the final and third recommendation is that the country's economic growth strategy cannot be based on companies not paying taxes. It is not sustainable. So whether it is income tax relief for large-scale investments or income tax relief for small businesses, it is not a sustainable economic growth strategy. But it's a credible budget, it's a sustainable budget, and it continues to have established a platform that we think it's a basis for economic growth. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. So, you know, you're new to the job, but you are very well experienced in managing budgets, in dealing with financial matters. So nobody is to come to the analysis and the discussion with the impression that this is a novice. The first question I would like to ask you, Minister, thank you for being with us, is, you know, is there anything that sort of caught your attention, that sort of stands out in that analysis that you want to speak to?
Sure. Thank you so much. I don't know. Are you hearing me?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Thank you so much for inviting me. Good afternoon, everyone. Let me, of course, acknowledge the board chairman, Mr. Facey, right there, and Earl Jarrett, and all the other directors of CAPRI, the staff members. You have been toiling for years, putting out, I believe, good research, and I'm saying good, not just because I'm here sitting on your platform, but research that is quite useful for us, and we do take note of it. And in fact, you would have heard me speak to the work that CAPRI has done with regards to the Student Loan Bureau and the very good ideas that you put forward. And we look forward to working with you to expand the opportunities for students through student loan. Having said that, to answer your question, Damien, what jumped out at me was your analysis on the tax revenue and the percentage of it that's coming from income tax. But I have to note, though, if I look back in time, in terms of the labor force, if you go back to 2013, we only had about 1,000,001 persons employed, and now we have close to 1.5 million persons employed. So that says to me that when I look at that number, maybe that's the reason it's taking up a bigger share of the tax revenues, because you have more persons working. Could that be?
That certainly is a factor. But if you have more persons working, you also have more persons buying. And so that should also raise the indirect taxes as well. That should raise GCT as well. So that can't explain all of the increase.
But that's an area, your analysis of the revenues that jumped out at me.
Okay.
Yeah.
So when we had this event last year and we did our analysis, the important debt to GDP KPI was then programmed to fall to 64% by the end of the last fiscal year. And we noticed that it ended the fiscal year at 68 point something percent. What explains why the debt has not contracted at the same rate as was programmed in last year's budget?
Well, I would say that during last year we had more than a couple of different weather events that would have taken a bit of a chunk out of our GDP. And since we're measured against that, then you would notice the ratio didn't quite make it in the trajectory in which we were anticipating. So I agree with your earlier statement about the vulnerability that exists in this country, especially from weather-related, it could be other global shocks as well, and how important it is for us to continue on that trajectory to 60%, but even to go lower than 60%. Maybe persons don't realize it, but when you look at our credit rating as a country, we're still considered in the below investment grade rating. So, you know, when we borrow on the global markets, we're borrowing at a higher rate than another country that's rated investment grade. And we think it's important for us as a country to get into that investment grade category. And when you look at countries there, they have lower debt to GDP than we do.
Okay, so that sounds like the target is investment grade.
Yes.
Excellent. Happy to hear that. You know, our analysis of adjusting for inflation shows us that the programmed expenditure on capital expenditure, on infrastructure, in inflation-adjusted terms is less than last year. Mm-hmm. Is that a decision, or is that, you know, capital projects that use up a lot of resources winding down?
We have several projects that were started last year that will end in this upcoming fiscal year. If you look back at the supplementary budget, we had gone all the way up to $80 billion for capital spending, but it did not happen, you know, for whatever reason, procurement process, other things. And so those are carryover items now into this fiscal year. So when you look at the capital numbers, we would definitely want it to be higher, but we have to work with what we have at the moment.
And what you expect to have in real terms is less than last year, which I pointed out is the first time this is happening since the pandemic.
Remember though that there's been a lot of spending on security, national security. Mm-hmm. If you look at the JDF, there's a lot of equipment, boats, and all kinds of things were bought for JDF that you don't have to repeat right away. And so if you see the budget for national security coming down, it's because of that. In health, we've spent a bit as well, putting in, as you know, there's a lot spent on Cornwall Hospital, and so that spending is winding down. There's been a lot spent on upgrading clinics and so forth. Maybe in the next fiscal year, you'll see that going up again as we begin the building here at University Hospital of the West Indies and so on. So it varies.
Okay, remember slido.com, putting the code CAPRI, and you can post your questions. So before we got here, we went out on the street and got some questions that people have for you. Let's run the first one.
The first question was, while paying down the debt is really important, when is things such as like capital expenditure going to be a priority for the government?
All right. Well, I'll just repeat what I said about paying down the debt. We would love to get to investment grade, and that's one of the significant criteria for a country to get into that category. With regards to our capital spending, if you look back in history, by any measure, the capital spending of this government has been significantly more than that of past governments, and it continues to be a focus of ours. And in fact, I know you must have heard a lot of complaints about the procurement process, and I've been charged with looking at it to see how can we re-engineer that process without giving up, without losing the kind of guardrails that we have. How can we make it so that procurement moves through faster and we get the kind of output that we want. So that is something that I will be focusing on to ensure that our capital budget gets spent whenever it's allocated. So there is a commitment of the government. There is a focus on capital spending, on roads, hospitals, for national security, for other areas, for agriculture. There's a lot going on in agriculture. There's a lot going on in other sectors of the economy. But I hear you. Until we work out the procurement process, look at it, see what's the stumbling block in it. Once we do that, you'll begin to see increased capital spending.
As you would expect, it's not possible for us to get through this discussion without addressing the elephant in the White House. How does the announcements made yesterday of increased tariffs on up to 10% on Jamaica's exports into the US and the implications of the range of tariffs that were introduced, which has started to affect the US economy already, will have implications for the global economy, will therefore have implications for Jamaica's economy. You must have been thinking about in the last 24 hours how that is going to affect the budget numbers that you just promulgated. What are your initial thoughts on that? How is it going to affect us, and what is the backup plan?
Well, Damien, as you know, and as you've said, increase in tariffs, which really are increase in taxes, will have the effect of raising prices. So our goods, when they go to the U.S., they're going to cost more to U.S. Businesses and to U.S. individuals there. Obviously, goods coming here as well will cost more, so that's good. If prices rise, you're looking at inflation, kind of general rise in inflation, but you're also looking at the counterbalancing force to that is the amount of disposable income that people have as well to spend on these goods. If your income is remaining the same and the goods, the price is going up, chances are you'll start to buy a little bit less of that good. So the initial impact will be, just a rise in prices. How much that will be, I don't really know yet, because you have countervailing forces against that. But as I've said before, we do have a central bank with a policy mandate for inflation targeting in the core inflation in the 4 to 6% range. I know that the Bank of Jamaica is very vigilant when it comes on to inflation. Unfortunately, that would mean, interest rates be rising, because that's the primary tool that's used. So maybe as a second effect, once they begin to see what the level of inflation is, and they think about, how this is going to keep translating in the economy, then that is when they may move. I'm not predicting. I have no business talking about inflation and the direction of it. It's the policy mandate of the Bank of Jamaica, but just thinking through logically how things may play out. That's how I see they could play out.
Yes, we have an independent central bank.
Yes.
Thankfully, you have no influence over them. So that question came from Slido, from a gentleman who identifies himself as Jamaica Hides. Another question coming from Slido.
Yes, I would like to ask her what resources are being allocated to improve our judicial system and the improvement of the courts and, just the access that the public has to the court system.
And I've heard tax administrators respond to it several times, but the question is asked here. We just identified that, there's no tax footprint for half of the employed labor force. So interested in democracy is asking, why don't we go after the tax evaders?
Well, Damien, I would say you may not see their footprint as individual taxpayers, but remember, a lot of persons have small businesses, right? And they may pay taxes that way. The last time I looked at the tax database, I saw a lot of persons on with double, 2 jobs, just different things that I wasn't expecting to see in that. But to answer the question about why doesn't TAJ go after them, they do. TAJ has a compliance department, and they do go out there after the delinquent taxpayers to see what they can collect. But there's an active compliance department at TAJ.
Yes, of course, we have had those discussions several times as well with tax administration. And one element of it that they made us aware of is that going after tax evaders generally has to be done on an individual basis. You know, people ask this question because they will know somebody who has a small shop in Maypen or has a professional practice in some remote part of the country, and therefore they ask the question, why don't the tax administration go after them? Well, going after is very costly. If they are going to have the capacity at tax administration to go after individual tax evaders, then it often costs more than the revenue you're going to raise. And so, you know, logistically and administratively, it's a difficult thing to do. And that's part of the problem, because it really is easy to avoid people knowing how much income that you earn. So that's an element of it as well, I know. So on Slido, somebody who has not identified themselves asks, how does the budget aid in increasing productivity?
Okay. One of the things I would think of is in the electricity area, the program that we announced to help persons to get access to electricity. Our expectation is that, let's say we were able to fast forward to the end of the process, that electricity rates would come down. You might be thinking, where am I going with this when you ask about productivity? But that's a huge cost in our economy. And to the extent that we can get that down significantly, we'll see greater efficiency, I think, in businesses, in households. So that's one area in which we're looking for productivity gains. In other areas, if you think about public sector workers, our commitment is to begin that process to look at how we can institute pay for performance or some variation on that. I know that it is not going to be easy because you have to measure it in order to pay for it, but it's a worthwhile activity for us to engage in. Our public sector workers are many. Government is the largest employer in the country, so it's important for us to start down that pathway to at least begin that process to see how we can, get greater efficiency out of our workers. Additionally, we have been and will continue to make greater use of technology. You would not, if you look at the summary budget, you may not see it. You'd have to dig into the details of it to see the allocation to entities like eGov to help put in more technology into government. there was a lot allocated to the NIDS program, several billions of dollars, to continue the rollout of that. That is going to significantly increase the efficiency across government, because consider the time that you have to go into a government office because they need to identify you. To the extent that you'll be able to do more things online because you have a NIDS ID that is trusted, and people at the other end are able to identify you, with a high degree of surety, then that is going to help productivity in the economy as a whole. So again, looking at public sector workers in terms of pay for performance, with whatever the variation of that is, it's worthwhile for us to begin that process. Technology, use of more technology in government, and there is an allocation for that. And again, even though I started with the electricity one, but it's going to improve the efficiency and productivity in the country as a whole as well.
Minister, the last time a Minister of Finance balanced the budget every year, brought down the debt meaningfully, promulgated a budget in an election year that didn't have any giveaways, was 2016. He got kicked out.
Well, Damien, this government has been in since 2016. It has proven to the Jamaican people that it is a fiscally responsible government. Here we are with the biggest test of all, an election year test, and we have stared a budget deficit in the face, and we said no thank you in the interest of Jamaica and for the greater good. We have been working since we've been here in 2016. We can point to a long list of accomplishments on roads, on in health, in security, in education. We can point to our record in working hard for the people of Jamaica. We know that we're in a different point in the political cycle, in the economic cycle, where Jamaicans have gotten used to us coming to Parliament during a budget season and saying no new taxes, still providing some relief for persons, but committing to not layering more taxes on the backs of Jamaicans. And to come here in an election year and throw all that away, for us, that was not even a consideration. We have said to the Jamaican people, we're going to continue managing the economy in a fiscally responsible way. We want to see that debt get to 60%, and we want to see it get lower. We'd love to reach to investment grade rating, because we know the significance of that, not just in terms of lower interest rates, but also in terms of the investments that we'll be able to attract. A lot of investors, when they look at countries around the world, they do pay attention to the credit rating of the country. There are pension funds in the developed countries that invest around the world, and they go by the ratings as well. Their mandate may be, you cannot invest in anything that's below investment grade, which, we're in that category. So we believe continuing on this path in terms of continuing the debt to GDP reduction getting a higher rating will open up a whole new world of investments to us as a country, which we need, to help to diversify, continue to diversify our economy, bring new industries here so that we can move up in terms of the employment curve to get in, higher paying jobs into the country and so on. So we see many benefits to us continuing on the path of debt to GDP reduction and being fiscally responsible with the funds that we collect from Jamaicans.
Good luck, genuinely. Let's take another question from the street earlier today.
Yes, I would like to ask her what resources are being allocated to improve our judicial system and the improvement of the courts and, just the access that the public has. Yes, I would like to ask her what resources are being allocated to improve our judicial system and the improvement of the courts and, just the access that the public has to the court system.
Budget, you will see billions of dollars. Minister Chuck has been very good in getting court infrastructure upgraded. He's been very good about bringing in technology into the court, just increasing the efficiency of court. I can't go into all the details about what happens inside the courtroom, but I know that he has been working to ensure efficiency so that the time that you have to wait to hear your case and to go through that whole process, I know that if you look at prior years and compare with what's happening now, you will see that things have been moving through the court system at a faster pace. So yes, there's been capital spending in the court system, and there's also been recurrent spending, meaning for higher wages as well in the courts, in the justice system.
All right, well, for all of you who took the time and made the effort to come here, let's see if we can take a question from the floor. So our microphone is going to come. Just raise your hand if you have a question for the minister. Anybody? All right, while you room, yes, okay, over here.
Sure. Thanks, Chief. Matt Norton. My question relates to public sector wages. I know there have been some discussions, including from the fiscal board, around whether the concerns around the percentage of the government's budget that's currently being allocated to public sector wages. And I know there's tension there with the unions, primarily because many public sector servants have had to bear the burden of the lack of growth for so long. And I'm curious as to your thinking on the recommendations to potentially cap public sector wages as a percentage of GDP, and what are the trade-offs that you're balancing as minister as you hear the different pros and cons of that?
Okay. So I know during the budget period I did speak to that in terms of giving the history of that particular ratio that was used, and to note that only one time in the history of using that it was really met. But I also wanted to point out, and I did point out to Jamaicans, that there are other guardrails that we use to ensure that the budget remains within the rules. So you have not only the debt to GDP ratio, but you also have the fiscal balance ratio. And as long as those two remain where they should be, then it kind of keeps everything in balance.
Thank you. Somebody on Slido is up. They haven't identified themselves. Let's see if I can just get back to it here. why is there so little dollars for social services, such as child protection, mental health, the disabled, and the elderly? Why are vulnerable people not a priority?
Well, the dollars for social services, they're spread across the budget in different ministries. I think we should, for the benefit of Jamaicans, probably pull them from all the different areas so persons can see. So it's just not only the Ministry of Labor and Social Security. Within every ministry, there's some amount of dollars for social services that's provided. I don't have a figure off the top of my head, but I know when you look at PATH, school feeding, transportation for students, right now in the education ministry, we cater to about 7,000, provide transportation for about 7,500 students. When you add social housing, when you add all the funds that are spent in constituencies, helping people with funeral expenses, giving them monies to help buy building material and so forth. I think if we were to add it up and do as a percentage of something, it would be a significant number. I'm not here, though, arguing that it couldn't be more. Yes, there's always a desire to do more, but again, we have to operate within the budgets that we have.
Well, let me broaden the question, since you ended on that note, your answer on that note. Let me broaden the question. Are you satisfied with both the size and the architecture of Jamaica's social safety net?
Not satisfied with the size or the architecture. I think it's kind of too spread out across different ministries, and so when somebody gets assistance, it probably doesn't take care of what it is that to be taken care of. So, for example, as an MP, if I give somebody, let's say, $80,000 to buy, not the cash, I don't give them the actual cash, but they're able to go to the hardware store and get access to $80,000 worth of building material. You know, it might not be adequate for that person. So I think there could be more focus on kind of, you know, concentrating the different amounts and ensuring that the recipients kind of get the assistance that they need.
Okay, but Minister, in this budget, you know, you speak about having the social safety net having too many channels, and in this budget, you have introduced a new channel, which is the Solidarity Program. And in CAPRI's report that we are launching this evening, it does raise the question of whether that money should not have been put and more efficiently deployed through one of the existing programs, and in particular through the PATH program, to bring some of the people who need these one-off cash payments into the PATH program.
Well, it will be administered by the Ministry of Labor and Social Security. So what this process will do as well is to capture information about those persons, because remember, the criteria or the condition is they would not have received government assistance. So, and I know as well that PATH itself is looking at how they can improve their delivery of service and other areas of it. So I would agree that there is need for us to look at all the different avenues through which we give this assistance to, you know, to make it kind of more meaningful by putting it all together and helping the person.
And actually, we can help you with that, because CAPRI has a report looking at Jamaica's social safety net called Come Make We Hold Your Hand.
Okay.
And it analyzes all the different channels of the welfare system and looks at which ones are effective, which ones are not effective. And so it's a blueprint for moving funding from the ones that are less effective into the ones that are more effective.
Okay.
So I'll make sure
It's
your
good to know,
your office gets a
good
copy
to
of
know,
that.
Because we would love persons, when they get assistance, that it's meaningful assistance that can move them from where they are now to a different place.
Let's take another question from the room. This gentleman in the middle here had his hand up the first time. Yes, can you just raise it high enough so somebody can see it? Yes. Identify yourself, please.
Yes, hello, good evening. My name is Aaron Hoylett. Nice to meet you all. All right, so my question is that the substantial portion of the budget is attributed to the wage bill. However, years ago, the Transformation Implementation Unit was designed and made so as to make the government more efficient and more productive. However, since the implementation of TIU, we've seen that the wage bill has increased and the size of the public sector workforce has increased. So what has TIU really accomplished in reducing the workforce and making it more efficient and leaner?
I'm not so sure that there's a mandate to reduce the workforce of the government. I know, having worked with TIU, which is the entity responsible for helping ministries to go through transformation, they've done a number of projects which I've itemized in the budget book. I know for sure, I can tell you, while at the Ministry of Education and Youth, they were there with us in implementing the government's platform, the My HR Plus, to ensure that all our teachers and staff, they're on a platform, their information is there. They were paid through that platform, and there are other parts to be implemented, but that brought significant efficiency to the Ministry of Education and Youth. Whereas before, if you wanted to know how many days you had left for vacation leave, you had to go find HR somewhere, as opposed to now being just able to log on to the system and find out. If you wanted to find out any information about your employment and so on, the interface is easy enough for you to use. You didn't have to try to find a person to call, and you didn't have to travel from where you were in Jamaica to come to Kingston to try to get an answer to a question. So there's been significant gains in government through technology. All of it is probably not felt yet across the system, because we still need to continue to do more from that perspective. And I know TIU is going around to ministries, the larger ones, MNS, Ministry of National Security, and Ministry of Health in particular, to do the same things for them that was done at the Ministry of Education and Youth. These projects take time to get done, but the gains are significant, even in the process, even while you're doing them.
Minister, on Slido, Kaimani is suggesting that the obstacle to even greater levels of investment, foreign direct investment, might be the poor skill levels of the labor force, might be concerns about security, and how is tax incentives and tax breaks going to do anything in the presence of those bottlenecks?
Well, the tax incentives, if they're talking about those to attract businesses to Jamaica, they will work. We are revamping the large-scale project tax incentive. Yes, I heard you about what your feelings are about that. They will come. If you note that we are making gains in terms on the security side, murders are down, and it's as a result of all the work and the investments that have gone on there. With regards to the labor force, it's interesting that you asked that. I mean, I have anecdotal evidence that companies will still come to Jamaica. There's an engineering firm that has come to Jamaica hiring out of one of our universities, and they can't get enough of that kind of labor. So it exists in pockets. Obviously, we'd love to have more highly trained persons in the society. We've made available a number of programs for persons to get themselves trained. We have reduced the cost of persons stepping forward to be trained. And we will continue to do that because we know the benefits to having a well-trained labor force. And I believe it's taken time for people to, or young people to buy into it, but we can see where they are taking up the offerings from heart. We can see that in the many colleges that are around, and I know that in time we will see it reflected in the numbers in terms of the percentage of the labor force that has certification and so on. We just have to keep at it, just keep our eyes at it, keep going at it year after year after year.
Luckily, CAPRI has a report that addresses the skills shortage. It's called Brain Gain. And it suggests a pathway for breaking the skills shortage in the fairly short run.
Okay.
So you might want to have a look at that.
I will take that on as well. Yes.
Paul Ward of Aracabessa points out that most of, in terms of compared to exports of goods and services to the US, most of the foreign exchange we get from the US comes in the form of tourism receipts, and implies that, the 10% export duty, really, or the 10% tariff on Jamaican exports won't apply to tourism. So it seems to suggest that that puts us in a relatively good position compared to other countries. So, that's something to think about. Another question coming from the online audience is, what about property taxes? When you think about the tax structure in terms of equity, the appallingly low level of property taxes is something that does jump out at you. And is that a consideration? And if not, why not?
Well, I can say when we started as a government, increasing property taxes was something that we did. We had a lot of uproar about it because we were trying to kind of catch up based on inflation, because property taxes had not been increased in a number of years. I think we need to get to that point, where we're indexing property taxes to inflation. We're at a point where we have been doing inflation targeting for a number of years now. We've had good experience with it. We see that it remains within a certain band. If it goes out, then the Bank of Jamaica takes action. So I don't think people should be afraid now if we say we'll index it, just so that it keeps, the steady increase. So you asked me, that's how I would think about it. Because if you wait too long, to do it, you get huge jumps, and that's when people really resist those kinds of big jumps that you have to take.
Okay, so I take that to mean that you will not be waiting much longer before addressing the issue of property taxes. And, I suggest that if you marry it with a reduction in some other tax rate, then you'll be pitting the people who are complaining about the increase in property tax against the ones who are going to benefit from the reduction in whatever other tax it is. Could be income tax.
Okay, just to be clear, Just to be clear, those are your thoughts. I gave no such undertaking.
Okay, you're very clear.
Yes.
You are neither confirming nor denying that such is under consideration.
Well, I can say it's not under consideration. Right, it's not
Okay.
under consideration.
All right. Let's take one more question from the audience. And there's a young woman here. The microphone is on its way to you.
I have a question, but I'm just going to allude a bit to what Dr. King just said. Just consider the fact that when you're paying a mortgage, technically, in a way, you don't yet own the property. So consider paying property tax or something you don't really own. You know, I don't really think that, you know, that's a strain. And then you consider the fact that, as I said, you don't own it, and then you're paying tax on it. So I think that's something that should be considered. But my question are more of a consideration or concern. I look at...
No, I see Mr. Jared sitting there, and
okay.
I'm
Right.
sure he's thinking, oh, you don't own the property?
When you're paying mortgage, I really...
You own it with the bank.
In my opinion, when you're paying mortgage, you don't really own it until you're complete, you know, because at any point they can come and take it from you. If you slip on some payments and so on, you know?
Okay.
Right. That's how I look at it.
So Mr. Jared says the title is in your name.
Well, okay, I appreciate his side. My consideration, I'm looking at my Jamaican terrain and so on, and I'm seeing that our people were heavy consumers of TikTok, right? We're the consumers. And we make our money, and you have good content at TikTok from Jamaicans. It's funny, some of it is really good, you know. But I would like for us to get to a point where we're the creators of such social media apps, more so than the consumers, right? I'd love to see us creating something comparable to a TikTok or a Facebook. So how is the budget making provisions technology-wise for us to come to that level where we're competitive, really considerably competitive in the technology market? And also, you know, a lot of persons, if you hear the talk on the streets, a lot of Jamaicans are sometimes edgy about the fact that, yes, we're having roads and the development is going on. It's good on the outside. But I can tell you that a lot of Jamaicans are sometimes edgy at the fact that it's the Chinese who are building most of the roads, you know? And it would be nice to come to a point where we're so developed that even if we combine with other nations and so on, are they passing that on? And how we want to get to a point where we're more self-sufficient, especially technology and, you know, development-wise. So I'd really love to see the budget making more provisions for that. Even in heart, it would be nice to see heart taking on a more, you know, providing for technology and making provisions for technology as well, and not just, you know, more basic. Although I do appreciate it, I'm a patron of the culinary skills that they offer, so I do appreciate, and it's a good program. But I'd love to see more technology-oriented programs also being offered through Heart as well.
All right, thank you very much.
All right, so I know that just recently I tallied up our investment in technology in schools, and it turned out to be about $8.3 billion over, you know, the last 5 or so years, and that was just on equipment going into schools, tablets, laptops, screens, and so forth. Add to that the fact that in more than 2/3 of our schools now, primary schools, high schools, they have adequate broadband capability in schools. A lot of schools now, you walk into the gate and you can log on to their Wi-Fi that's there. That's compliments of the government of Jamaica. Within our colleges, we have provided scholarships for persons to, specialize in STEM courses, which includes technology as well. So I think by any objective measure, if you look at the investments in technology over the last 5 years and compare it with other periods, we are leaps and bounds ahead as a country. Is there still a lot of work to be done? Yes, not only by government, but by our private sector telecommunications companies as well. We also need to see a significantly lower price for internet connectivity in the country. I know many business persons have complained about how expensive it is, especially in the BPO sector. So there's still a lot to be done. I know HEART offers technology courses. A lot more is available today than ever, but at the same time, I hear you, we have to continue making the investments for our young people, because the world is changing very fast, and we have to equip them with the skills to be able to keep up in the world of work. There are a lot of areas that still need to see improvements in technology, certainly in our banking sector, in healthcare, other areas as well. But we will continue annually to make budget allocation for continued technology improvements.
Okay, Minister, one last question that comes from the street earlier today.
Are you happy with the budget? Are you happy with the budget?
Considering where we are as a country, we are still not where we want to be just yet in terms of our debt to GDP ratio, in terms of other ratios. I'm happy with where we are, with what we've been able to do over the last 10 or so years to keep Jamaica on the path of being fiscally responsible, because we know the gains from that are significant. It just gives rise to increased confidence on the part of our business people. It allows them to plan better than they have been able to in the past. You can look back at periods during which we had very high inflation. I don't know how businesses survived in those periods. No, there's greater confidence when you look at the trajectory for inflation and other things. You can expect our government to continue to manage the fiscal affairs in a responsible way, so that we don't have these fits and starts that we've seen in the past. So yes, I am happy with it, and in particular, given that this is an election year, I am thrilled that we are able to say to the people of Jamaica, even though it's an election year, we are not running with it. We are not going to bust the budget, because we know exactly what that would mean. It would mean a loss of confidence among Jamaicans, among the business sector. I have no way of knowing what the negative, I can guess what it would be, but it could be way more negative than what I'm thinking if people get it in their heads that, the government is departing from this fiscally prudent way. So yes, I'm happy with what we've been able to put forward, considering as well that we are coming out of just devastating hurricane and tropical storms and rains and rains and rains, we were still able to come to the people of Jamaica and say we're not levying any new taxes on you, and we're able to deliver to you a balanced budget again, even in this election year.
Minister Williams, I know you have had a busy few months. Thank you very much for making the time for this discussion.
Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you, everyone.
The national budget isn't just numbers on a page. It affects the cost of living, the quality of services, and the opportunities available to every Jamaican. But how much do people really know about it? We took to the streets to hear firsthand how the budget impacts daily life, whether citizens feel they have a voice in the process, and what they believe should change. From markets to campuses, supermarkets to the city streets, this is what they had to say.
I didn't watch the budget, and I don't think I know that much other than like the big ticket items.
Well, I remember a few things. I definitely like the SLB proposal, and also seeing that I want to get a job as soon as I graduate. I like the income tax threshold.
I noticed that they were focusing a lot on the stock market in terms of trying to bolster it and, further bolstering the junior stock market. So I liked that because I believe it's very important to invest in Jamaica.
I think the most prescient issues for me as a student would probably be education funding, specifically regarding the university, and also spending on general life issues like transport.
But as a taxman, we used to work with tax office on a Saturday. We really appreciate that. I like that. The ticket them accumulate, we'd love to pay them.
Would love to see more money going into the education system.
Just because the healthcare and the security force thing.
I'm a lawyer by profession, so I would definitely want to see more resources allocated to strengthening our judicial infrastructure.
I actually love that I can actually see the money being used for the roads, because that was a big struggle. You can't afford to always change your tire.
A lot of communities have young members there who are not working, and these are persons who are going to find themselves in crime. So provide more computers in different communities and things that they can really do in their community, or more places that offer trade.
I would certainly be interested in participating in a consultation process.
Yes, of course.
We the elders, the citizens of Jamaica should have a say in the budget.
I think the people them should have more say, and not just the politicians them alone.
Of course, majority of people should have a say in what affects them daily. They should have a say, so you place more emphasis upon the people's business.
Absolutely. I think we need to have a greater say. I think they need to do more groundwork, maybe do surveys, just to be on the ground more, because it directly affects us.
Okay, how are we feeling? Great. So tonight's discussion analyzed the government's budget and expenditure, highlighted key shifts in the fiscal policy, and assessed the broader implications for economic growth and stability for Jamaica. A heartfelt thank you to our Executive Director, Dr. Damien King, for your presentation and for leading the one-on-one discussion. And thank you, Minister Fayval Williams, for engaging with us and sharing your insight. We also want to express our gratitude to our partners and our good corporate sponsors who continue to support CAPRI's work throughout the years. Your contributions make it possible to produce independent, data-driven research that informs public policy, including this evening's Budget Breakdown 2025. And now, the moment we've all been waiting for. The full Budget Breakdown 2025 report is now available for download on capricaribbean.org. We encourage you all to read it, share it, and use it as a tool to inform and shape ongoing conversations about Jamaica's physical future. Before we close, we invite you to look out for our upcoming report launches, including One City Study 1 and Study 2 reports, which will examine the governance and socio-economic challenges of Jamaica's urban centers. These reports go beyond identifying the issues to present actionable solutions for creating better managed, more sustainable cities. We look forward to that discussion when the time comes. Until then, thank you for being a part of this evening's Budget Breakdown 2025, and have a great evening. Thank you.